enjoyed the books we picked out so far, and this month we are going to be reading I Survived the Attacks of September 11th in 2001. Like all I Survived books, this book is based on fact and true history, and so I want to encourage you to maybe ask your friends and neighbors and parents especially what they were doing on 9/11 is what is most commonly called. I was alive on 9/11 and I know exactly where I was and what was happening in the school that I was attending at the time when we got the news of the attack. And so I know your parents will definitely have stories to tell. And even though 2001 sounds like a long time ago, it really wasn't. And it's a really important part of our history. So today we are going to be reading the first 3 chapters of the I Survived book. Chapter 1. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, 8:46 a.m., New York City, New York. A bright blue sky stretched over New York City. It was the morning rush. Men and women hurried to work. Taxis, cars, and buses zoomed through the streets. And then there was the plane. Many people in Lower Manhattan heard it before they saw it. The screaming roar of jet engines. The massive aircraft streaked through the sky, barely skimming over rooftops. Up and down the sidewalks, people froze. 11-year-old Lucas Cowley wasn't supposed to be in Manhattan that day. His parents had no idea that he'd caught a train to the city, that he was there on a crowded sidewalk, looking up as it all began. Lucas watched, almost hypnotized, as the plane careened through the sky. He'd never seen a plane flying so low. It was so close he could read the letters on the tail. AA, American Airlines. Panicked questions swirled through his mind. Was there something wrong with the plane? Was the pilot sick, lost, confused? Pull up, Lucas wanted to shout. Go higher. But the plane kept getting lower and faster. And now Lucas's heart stopped as he saw what was in the plane's path. The twin towers of the World Trade Center. The silver and glass buildings, each a quarter of a mile tall, rose high above the New York City skyline. The plane sped up. No! With one last ferocious roar, the jet plunged into the side of one of the towers. There was a thundering explosion. People all around Lucas screamed. And then the bright blue sky filled with black smoke and fire. Chapter 2. Wednesday, August 29th, 2001. Port Jackson, New York, 10 a.m. As usual, football practice was brutal. It was 95 degrees. Lucas was soaked in sweat. 3 guys had already puked up their Gatorades. Lucas's body felt like one big bruise. A football came sailing through the air. It looked like an impossible catch, Lucas's favorite kind. He took off, legs pumping, eyes on the ball. At exactly the right split second, he leaped up as high as he could, plucked the ball from the air, and grabbed it to his chest as he crashed to the ground. All around him, guys hooted and cheered and high-fived. A familiar happy feeling rushed over Lucas. Sure, his entire body ached. Yeah, Coach B was always screaming at them. But this is where Lucas was happiest, where he belonged. On this broiling hot turf field with his football team, the Port Jackson Jaguars. It had been Uncle Benny's idea that Lucas could be a football player. Benny was Dad's best friend from Ladder 177, the New York City firehouse, where they both worked. Lucas had always liked Uncle Benny. Everyone did. Dad once said that Benny was like the firehouse cheerleader, a 6'2" cheerleader with a shamrock tattoo. But it wasn't until Lucas was in 3rd grade that he really got close to Uncle Benny. That year, Lucas's dad was badly hurt in a warehouse fire in Brooklyn. He was in the hospital burn center for almost 2 months. Uncle Benny practically moved in with Mom and Lucas until Dad was better. Lucas would wake up some mornings and find Uncle Benny reading the sports pages at the kitchen table. Before Lucas could say, "Where's Mom?" Uncle Benny would grab him by the arm and sit him down. "You gotta see this," he'd say, holding up a picture of some football player Lucas had never heard of. Lucas would sit there pretending to be interested. He'd never been a sports kid. He and Dad were always so busy working on their projects. Before Dad got hurt, they'd spend every weekend in their basement workshop building a model of the Ladder 177 truck, the Seagrave 75. But Uncle Benny wasn't interested in truck models. What Uncle Benny loved was football. And soon enough, he had Lucas glued to Monday Night Football, cheering for Uncle Benny's teams, watching ESPN, and booing the players Uncle Benny hated. Uncle Benny bought Lucas a football, and then spent hours with him in the backyard, teaching him to throw and catch. And then came the day when Uncle Benny appeared with the form to sign up for the Jaguars. "I can't really play football," Lucas said. Back then, Lucas had been pudgy, shorter even than some of the girls in his grade. But Uncle Benny got his mom and dad to sign the form. And the next thing Lucas knew, Uncle Benny was driving him to his first practice. Lucas had a smile as he thought back to that day. He was a little butterball stuffed into pads and a brand new cleats. "I think we should go home," he said to Uncle Benny, choking back tears. "No, you don't," Uncle Benny said. "You want to get out there and show what you can do." And Uncle Benny's eyes were so big and sparkling like bright lights, spelling out the words, "You can do it!" So Lucas did it. And from that first day, Lucas felt like he'd found his place. It wasn't really the game he loved. It was being on the team, being surrounded by the guys. They watched each other's backs, winners or losers. They stuck together. Uncle Benny had also taught him the secret of catching football, that you had to believe you were going to catch it. You have to feel it in your heart, Uncle Benny said. It worked every time. Almost. Toward the end of the practice, someone threw another impossible pass. "Go get it, Lucas," the guys screamed. And off Lucas went, his eyes glued to the ball, his arms stretched out so long he felt like he could grab the sun. But something went wrong. His heart knew he would catch it, but his ankle didn't. It wobbled, and Lucas lost his balance. Suddenly, he was flying through the air, a missile out of control. He crashed head first into the hard turf. Crack! He could practically feel his brain smacking against the inside of his skull. A white light of pain exploded inside Lucas's head. He saw stars, a whole galaxy behind his eyes. And then he blacked out. Chapter 3. The next few hours were a blur. The guys swarming around him, Coach B helping him off the field, the long wait to the emergency room, moms and dads' worried faces. But in the end, Lucas was fine. He just had a concussion. Sure, it was the worst concussion he'd gotten during playoffs last season. It was worse than the concussion he'd gotten during playoffs last season and the one before that during the summer after 4th grade. But he knew he would get better if he took it easy, just like the other times. That night, Dad came into Lucas's room to check on him. "Feeling okay?" he asked. "I'm good, Dad," Lucas said. He really was feeling much better. What killed him was knowing he'd be off the field for 12 days. He already missed the guys. Looking up at Dad, Lucas saw a face almost exactly like his own. They even had the same specks of green in their brown eyes. "You need anything?" Dad asked. "I'm good," Lucas said again. Lucas stayed very still, hoping Dad would stick around and talk. But Dad stood up. He leaned over and kissed Lucas on the forehead, and he was gone. Lucas's heart sank a little. There had been a time when Dad would have plopped himself down on Lucas's bed and announced his plan for their next adventure. Some nights back then, they'd wait for Mom to fall asleep so they could sneak down to the basement to work on the sea grave. Dad and Lucas had been a team of two. But then came the warehouse fire. 2 years had passed since it happened, but the memories were still sharp. The doorbell ringing in the middle of the night, the Chief and Uncle Benny standing in the doorway, still stinking of smoke, Mom's tears, and later the sight of Dad wrapped in bandages, his face white with pain. Lucas had always known that his dad's job was dangerous. Sometimes Dad would bring Lucas to the warehouse on his days off. Lucas would help with the chores, washing the truck, cooking lunches, checking the hoses. But what he loved most was sitting around the big round kitchen table, listening to the guys talk about the fires they'd fought. To Lucas, they were superheroes. They ran into buildings filled with blazing orange flames and choking black smoke. They used metal spears to smash windows, rip out walls, and bash through the doors. They carried people down oven-hot stairwells and dangled from ropes hundreds of feet in the air. The fires they tamed were more evil and ferocious than any video game villain or movie monster. But it wasn't until the warehouse fire that Lucas understood what a fire could do to a real man, a man like his dad. Dad had never talked about what happened to him inside the warehouse. All Lucas knew was that four firemen died, and Dad was badly burned in an explosion. Even after all this time, the scars on Dad's arms were bright red and lumpy, like raw hamburger. But the burns weren't the worst of what that fire had did to Dad. It took away his easy smile and booming laugh. It turned him quiet. Some days, Dad barely talked at all. He'd get this look in his eyes, like his mind was somewhere else, probably sifting through the ashes in that warehouse. Lucas stopped asking when they'd get back to that model of the Seagrave, which was half finished and covered in dust in the basement. And when the memories of that night came back, or he'd start worrying that Dad would never be himself again, he'd close his eyes and imagine himself on the football field, surrounded by the guys, their voices calling out his name as he made one of his famous catches. And that is where we'll finish it today, and I'll see you guys next week for continuing the book.